I am a man, not a beast to be sold. You will hear me and know my worth.
The night the river refused to stay quiet was the night everything changed, and long before anyone in town understood what they had witnessed, the story had already begun to bury itself in whispers. Because secrets do not arrive loudly. They settle, slowly like fog over water, and by the time people notice they are already lost inside them. In the spring of 1856, the Mississippi moved like a living creature beside the plantation lands of St. Clair Parish, heavy with rain and restless with unseen currents. The riverboats passed carrying cotton wealth and human sorrow in equal measure, and every lantern that flickered along the banks revealed a world carefully divided between those who owned and those who endured. At the center of this world stood Belmore Plantation, a sprawling estate of white columns and shadowed verandas owned by Jonathan Hale, a man the town described as disciplined, respectable, and unshakably powerful. He was known for order, for control, for the way nothing on his land ever appeared out of place. But power often depends on silence, and silence has a way of cracking. Inside the grand house lived his young wife, Eleanor Hale, a woman whose presence never fully belonged to the world she inhabited. She had arrived 2 years earlier from Charleston, carrying refinement education and a quiet sadness no one could quite explain. The townspeople admired her beauty but whispered about her distance because Eleanor rarely laughed, rarely attended gatherings, and spent long hours alone in the library overlooking the fields. Servants noticed things others ignored. They noticed how she watched the horizon longer than necessary, how letters arrived bearing unfamiliar seals, and how she treated the enslaved workers with an unsettling gentleness that made overseers uncomfortable. Among those workers was Samuel, a man whose name was spoken carefully even among his own people. Tall, strong, and observant, he carried himself with a calm intelligence that unsettled those who believed obedience should look smaller. He had once belonged to another plantation farther south before being sold after its owner's death. And though no one knew the full story, rumors followed him like shadows. Some claimed he could read, others said he remembered too much. Samuel worked mostly near the house, repairing tools, managing accounts for the overseer, and assisting wherever skill was required. Jonathan Hale valued usefulness above all things, and Samuel proved useful. Their paths first crossed on an afternoon heavy with heat when Eleanor entered the carriage house searching for a missing ledger. She found Samuel carefully copying numbers into a worn notebook, his handwriting precise and practiced. For a moment, neither spoke because both understood the danger of recognition. "You can read," she said quietly. Not as accusation, but as realization. Samuel hesitated before answering, "Yes, ma'am." The air between them changed in that instant. Not through rebellion, but through understanding. Eleanor did not report him. She did not call the overseer. Instead, she asked where he had learned, and when he explained in brief, careful words, she listened as though hearing truth for the first time since arriving at Belmore. From that day forward, small conversations began, always brief, always cautious, always hidden within ordinary tasks. A book left open, a question about numbers, a discussion disguised as instruction. Nothing improper, nothing visible, and yet everything dangerous. Because knowledge creates connection, and connection threatens hierarchy. Weeks passed, and the plantation continued its routines, unaware of the quiet transformation unfolding beneath its order. Eleanor began walking the gardens more often, choosing paths that passed near Samuel's work areas. Their conversations never lingered yet. Each exchange carried weight beyond words. Samuel spoke rarely of himself, but when he did, Eleanor sensed a depth shaped by loss and endurance. He spoke of rivers of distant states, of families separated without warning, of nights spent listening for footsteps that determined survival. Eleanor listened not as mistress to servant, but as one human witnessing another's truth. And for the first time since her marriage, she felt awake. Jonathan Hale noticed changes, though he could not name them. His wife seemed less fragile, less obedient to the invisible expectations surrounding her. She asked questions about plantation finances, about labor assignments, about things wives were not expected to understand. He dismissed it at first, attributing curiosity to boredom, but unease lingered. Control relies on predictability, and Eleanor was becoming unpredictable. One evening during supper, Jonathan described plans to expand. Production requiring stricter discipline among workers. Eleanor's fork paused midair, and she asked whether harsher measures truly increased loyalty. The room fell silent. Jonathan laughed lightly, but his eyes hardened, reminding her gently that compassion had limits in a world built on order. Eleanor lowered her gaze, yet something inside her refused to retreat. That night she returned to the library, unable to sleep. Rain tapped against the tall windows and thunder rolled across the fields. She opened a book. Samuel had once mentioned a volume discussing liberty and human dignity, words considered harmless philosophy to some and dangerous ideas to others. As she read, footsteps approached outside the door, then faded. She realized how easily fear governed every movement within the house, even hers. Outside, lightning illuminated the fields, revealing rows of workers' cabins glowing faintly under storm clouds. Eleanor imagined lives unfolding within them. Stories never recorded, voices never heard. The realization struck her with unbearable clarity. Belmore Plantation functioned perfectly because suffering remained unseen, and once seen, it could never again be ignored. Days later, a traveling preacher arrived, stirring unrest among nearby plantations, preaching messages of spiritual equality that owners dismissed as harmless sermons. Yet whispers spread among workers carrying hope, fragile and forbidden. Jonathan ordered tighter supervision. Samuel sensed tension rising long before others. Did he notice overseers watching more closely, conversations ending abruptly, and riders traveling between plantations after dark? Something was changing beyond Belmore, something larger than any single person's choices. One afternoon, Eleanor approached him near the orchard, her voice lower than usual, asking whether he believed freedom could truly exist. Samuel looked toward the fields before answering. "Freedom exists first in thought," he said softly, "but thought alone can be dangerous." Understood then that danger surrounded them, not because of actions already taken, but because awareness itself had begun. Their connection deepened, not through romance, but through shared recognition of injustice. A bond formed quietly, yet powerfully. Each conversation stripped away illusions Eleanor had once accepted, without question. Meanwhile, rumors reached town of escaped workers moving north, guided by hidden networks. Plantation owners responded with fear, organizing patrols and reinforcing authority. Jonathan joined these efforts, determined to maintain order within St. Clair Parish. The tension between worlds grew sharper each day. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Eleanor watched Samuel walking back toward the cabins, his silhouette framed by fading light, and for reasons she could not explain. She felt certainty settle inside her. Life as it existed could not continue unchanged. At that same moment, Jonathan received a letter, warning of unrest nearby, advising vigilance against internal betrayal. He folded the letter slowly, unaware that betrayal had already begun, not through conspiracy, but through awakening. The river flowed endlessly beside Belmore, carrying secrets toward distant places, and as night descended, the plantation appeared, peaceful lanterns glowing softly, windows closed against darkness. But beneath that calm, something irreversible had started. A question had been asked. A truth had been seen. And once truth enters a story, it refuses to leave. Before dawn arrived, St. Clair Parish still believed its world unbreakable. By the next act, that belief would begin to fracture, and the quiet connections formed in shadows would pull every life at Belmore toward consequences none of them yet understood. Morning arrived at Belmore Plantation with a strange heaviness, as if the land itself sensed change moving beneath ordinary routines. The sky hung low and pale, and even the birds seemed quieter while workers stepped into the cotton fields under the watchful eyes of mounted overseers. Nothing appeared different, yet everything felt altered. Because once awareness enters a life, silence becomes impossible to maintain. Eleanor Hale woke before sunrise, unable to escape restless thoughts. The conversations she had shared with Samuel lingered in her mind, not as rebellion, but as clarity. She began noticing details she had once ignored: the exhaustion on workers' faces, the way laughter stopped when riders approached the fields, the invisible tension shaping every movement on the plantation. From her bedroom window, she watched the labor lines forming, and for the first time she did not see property or order. She saw individuals bound within a system designed to erase them. The realization frightened her, not because it was new, but because it now felt undeniable. Downstairs, Jonathan Hale reviewed plantation accounts with sharp precision. Expansion plans occupied his thoughts as cotton prices rose across Louisiana. Success required discipline, and discipline required distance. He believed firmly that emotion weakened authority, and authority was the only barrier between civilization and chaos. Yet he could not shake the feeling that something within his household had shifted. Eleanor spoke less during meals, but when she did, her questions carried quiet challenge. She asked about wages in northern factories, about laws being debated in distant states, about rumors of abolitionist movements spreading through river towns. Jonathan answered, patiently at first, then with growing irritation, reminding her that politics belonged to men who understood the realities of ownership. Eleanor nodded, but no longer accepted his certainty. Outside the house, Samuel continued his duties, carefully aware that attention around the plantation had sharpened. Patrol riders appeared more frequently, and conversations among workers turned cautious. Rumors traveled faster than wagons. Stories of escape, successful and failed, of families disappearing overnight. Guided by unknown allies, hope moved through the cabins like a hidden current, powerful yet dangerous. Samuel avoided speaking openly, yet others sought him quietly, asking whether he believed freedom truly existed beyond the river. He answered carefully, never promising what he could not guarantee, but reminding them that survival sometimes required patience before action. He understood risk better than most. One afternoon, Eleanor requested assistance organizing the plantation library, a task Jonathan considered harmless. Samuel entered the room carrying ledgers and dust cloths, aware that privacy within the house was rare yet precious. The door remained slightly open, ensuring appearances remained proper. Yet their voices lowered instinctively. Eleanor asked about the northern states, whether people there truly lived without chains. Samuel described cities where laws differed, though prejudice still existed. He spoke not with fantasy, but with realism. Freedom was complicated, incomplete, but real, enough to pursue. Listening to him, Eleanor felt the boundaries of her world expanding beyond plantation walls. She realized education had taught her history, but never truth, and truth now stood before her, speaking calmly despite the danger surrounding them. A sudden sound in the hallway ended their conversation. Both stepped apart, instantly returning to roles expected of them. A servant passed without suspicion, yet the moment revealed how fragile their interactions had become after Samuel left. Eleanor remained alone among towering bookshelves, her heart racing. She understood that simple conversation now carried consequence. Meanwhile, Jonathan received troubling news from neighboring estates. 2 enslaved men had escaped during the night. Aided by unknown accomplices, patrols searched nearby roads, and plantation owners gathered to discuss stricter enforcement measures. Once considered extreme were now discussed openly. Fear reshaped the community. Jonathan returned home, unsettled, determined to ensure loyalty within Belmore. He ordered increased inspections and instructed overseers to monitor gatherings after dark. Though he trusted his system, he trusted vigilance more. The changes rippled quickly through the plantation, workers felt. The tightening control conversations shortened, and nighttime songs faded into silence. Even the air seemed heavier beneath constant observation. Samuel sensed danger growing, not only for himself but for Eleanor, whose curiosity placed her unknowingly near suspicion. He began limiting their interactions, keeping distance despite the unspoken understanding between them. Eleanor noticed immediately and felt an unexpected loss. Though she understood the reason, the absence created a hollow awareness she could not ignore. Days passed with restrained tension until one evening, when a violent storm rolled across St. Clair Parish. Thunder shook the plantation, and rain flooded the fields, forcing workers indoors earlier than usual. Lightning illuminated the landscape, revealing fleeting images of cabins and trees bending beneath wind. Inside the main house, Jonathan entertained neighboring planters discussing security concerns. Their voices carried through open hallways filled with anxiety disguised. As confidence, Eleanor listened from the staircase, hearing plans for harsher punishment and coordinated patrols. One man claimed kindness, encouraged rebellion. Another insisted fear preserved order. Eleanor felt cold realization settle within her. These men did not see cruelty, they saw necessity, unable to remain. She retreated toward the back veranda where rain fell in silver sheets. Across the yard she noticed movement near the storage barn, a figure struggling against the storm. She stepped closer, recognizing Samuel securing loose supplies before the wind could destroy them. For a moment they stood separated by rain yet connected through shared understanding. "You should not be outside," she called softly. He answered without looking toward her, "Some things must be protected before morning comes." The words carried deeper meaning than the task itself. Eleanor sensed urgency beneath his calm tone, as if he understood events approaching faster than anyone expected. The storm intensified, forcing her back inside, yet unease remained. Later that night, distant shouting echoed from the road. Patrol riders had captured a young runaway from another plantation, dragging him through mud toward punishment. Witnesses watched silently from windows, aware that resistance invited suffering. The incident spread fear across Belmore, reminding everyone how fragile hope could be. Eleanor could not sleep. Images of the captured man haunted her. She realized the system surrounding her depended not only on labor but on terror, and once understood she could no longer remain neutral. The following morning she made a decision, small yet irreversible. She began teaching reading lessons secretly to a young house servant using discarded books. Just an hour, each day hidden beneath ordinary duties, but enough to challenge rules Jonathan assumed unbreakable. Acts of change rarely begin loudly, they begin quietly within conscience. Samuel discovered her secret accidentally and warned her gently of danger, yet he also recognized determination in her expression, the same determination he had seen in those who chose risk over submission. Their conversations resumed cautiously, now shaped by shared purpose rather than curiosity. Alone they discussed possibilities, routes along the river, rumors of networks guiding escapees northward. Eleanor listened with growing awareness that knowledge demanded responsibility. Outside pressures increased. Patrols doubled and suspicion spread among owners, convinced rebellion threatened their control. Jonathan grew more vigilant, watching workers closely, unaware that transformation within his own household posed the greatest challenge. One evening he confronted Eleanor about her growing interest in plantation affairs, asking whether loneliness had unsettled her. She answered carefully, speaking of fairness rather than accusation. But Jonathan heard only defiance. He reminded her firmly of her role as mistress of Belmore, responsible for maintaining harmony, not questioning foundations. Eleanor agreed outwardly, yet inside something had already crossed a boundary she could not return from. As summer approached, the river swelled higher. Carrying boats filled with travelers and news stories arrived of northern activists aiding escape routes, increasing paranoia among plantation communities. Meetings grew tense, alliances formed based on fear rather than trust. Samuel sensed timing becoming critical. Waiting too long meant losing opportunity, yet moving too soon meant disaster. He wrestled silently with decisions affecting not only himself but others who might follow. Eleanor, meanwhile, felt trapped between worlds, loyalty expected by marriage and truth revealed through understanding. Each day required performance, masking thoughts that grew stronger with every passing hour. One evening, as sunset painted the fields crimson, Samuel spoke words neither had yet dared to voice. "Change is coming, whether we are ready or not." Eleanor understood immediately. The world around them stood balanced on fragile certainty, ready to fracture under pressure, building far beyond Belmore Plantation. Neither knew how events would unfold, only that stillness could not last. As darkness settled over St. Clair Parish, lanterns flickered across the land, revealing a plantation outwardly unchanged, yet internally shifting toward inevitable conflict. The river continued moving south, carrying secrets forward, while within Belmore, choices formed quietly, shaping destinies already set in motion. And by the time the next act began, those choices would demand action, turning whispered awareness into consequences no one could escape. The summer heat arrived early that year, pressing down upon Belmore Plantation like an invisible weight that refused to lift. By June, the air itself felt restless, thick with humidity, tension, and something far more dangerous than either: anticipation. Change no longer lingered quietly beneath daily life. It had begun to move, and everyone, whether they admitted it or not, could feel it coming. Samuel noticed it first in the fields. Workers who once avoided eye contact now exchanged brief glances filled with unspoken meaning. Conversations stopped when overseers approached but resumed in hushed tones once distance returned. Even laughter sounded different, shorter, cautious, as if joy itself had learned to hide. Rumors traveled faster than wagons along the river road. A plantation upriver had lost 3 workers in a single night. Another owner reported tools missing, maps discovered scratched into barn walls, coded symbols appearing on fence posts. Patrol riders increased their rounds, their horses leaving deep prints in the soft earth long after sunset. Fear was spreading among the owners. Hope was spreading among everyone else. Samuel worked carefully, never drawing attention, yet his awareness sharpened with every passing day. He understood the delicate balance forming. Too much boldness could destroy everything, but silence alone would change nothing. Meanwhile, Eleanor Hale lived between 2 realities. In public, she remained the composed mistress of Belmore, overseeing meals, managing household accounts, greeting visitors with practiced grace. To outsiders, nothing appeared unusual. But privately, her world had transformed completely. Each morning she carried books beneath folded linens to the small storage room behind the kitchen where she continued secret reading lessons. What began as instruction for 1 servant quietly expanded. 2 became 3, then 4. They learned letters slowly, tracing words with trembling fingers as though touching something sacred. Eleanor realized education itself was an act of resistance. The danger thrilled and terrified her equally. One afternoon, while guiding a young boy through a passage of simple text, she heard footsteps approaching unexpectedly. Panic surged through the room. Books disappeared beneath baskets. Students scattered through back corridors just as a housemaid entered. The woman said nothing, only watched Eleanor for a long moment before quietly closing the door behind her. That silence carried both warning and protection. Eleanor understood then that secrets were no longer hers alone. Across the plantation, awareness was spreading beyond control. Jonathan Hale, however, sensed only disorder. Reports from neighboring estates unsettled him deeply. Meetings among plantation owners grew more urgent, discussions turning toward harsher enforcement. Some argued that kindness had weakened authority. Others insisted outside agitators were poisoning loyal workers with dangerous ideas. Jonathan returned from these gatherings increasingly tense. He ordered stricter curfews. Night gatherings were banned entirely. Lantern checks became routine. Overseers were instructed to report unusual behavior immediately. Belmore began to feel less like a home and more like a guarded fortress. Eleanor watched these changes with quiet dread. Each new rule tightened the risk surrounding everything. She and Samuel had built through conversation and trust. Yet instead of retreating, she felt her resolve strengthening. The injustice she once observed from a distance now lived directly around her. One evening, during supper, Jonathan spoke sharply about recent escapes. "They believe freedom lies just beyond the river," he said, frustration cutting through his voice. "They do not understand the chaos waiting for them." Eleanor met his gaze carefully. "Perhaps they understand more than we think." The room fell silent. Jonathan studied her expression longer than usual, suspicion flickering behind his calm exterior. Though he said nothing further, Eleanor sensed a boundary had been crossed. From that night forward, his attention toward her changed. Samuel noticed as well. Jonathan began appearing unexpectedly near the house library. He questioned schedules, inspected records personally, and occasionally observed workers without announcing himself. The atmosphere thickened with scrutiny. Samuel reduced visits to the main house, communicating with Eleanor only through brief, cautious exchanges when necessity allowed. Distance, however, did not erase connection. Instead, it deepened urgency. Late one evening, under the cover of darkness, Samuel met quietly with a small group near the edge of the cotton fields. The moon provided just enough light to see faces, tired, yet determined. They spoke in fragments. A contact in the river town. A boat captain willing to look away. Safe houses rumored northward along hidden routes. Nothing certain. Everything dangerous. Samuel listened more than he spoke. Leadership, he understood, was not about commanding others, but ensuring survival. Every decision carried consequences not only for individuals but entire families. Before dispersing, one older man asked the question none wished to voice aloud. When? Samuel hesitated. Timing meant everything. Soon, he said finally, but only when the path is clear. The answer satisfied no one completely, yet fear kept further questions silent. Back at the house, Eleanor faced her own growing conflict. She began packing small items quietly, not clothing at first, only personal keepsakes. A book gifted by her mother, a silver hairpin. Letters she could not abandon. Each object felt like a farewell she was not yet ready to admit. At times, doubt crept in. Could she truly abandon everything she had known? Could survival exist beyond the rigid world that had defined her entire life? Yet every time hesitation appeared, she remembered the captured runaway dragged past the plantation weeks earlier, remembered the terror in his eyes. Staying now felt impossible. One sweltering afternoon tension erupted unexpectedly. An overseer accused a young worker of stealing tools. The accusation escalated quickly, voices rising beneath the relentless sun. Workers gathered at a distance, forced to watch as punishment was threatened. Samuel stepped forward cautiously, offering explanation that tools had been moved for repairs. The overseer interpreted intervention as defiance. For a moment, violence seemed inevitable. Jonathan arrived just as confrontation reached its peak. He restored order swiftly, dismissing the accusation after inspection revealed no theft. Yet his gaze lingered on Samuel longer than necessary. Suspicion had taken root. That evening, Samuel understood something critical. Time was running out. Jonathan's attention was narrowing. Another incident could expose everything. Later, under fading twilight, Samuel and Eleanor finally spoke openly again near the garden path where magnolia trees shielded them from view. The patrols are increasing, Samuel said quietly. Soon movement will become impossible. Eleanor's voice trembled despite her resolve. Then we cannot wait. The words hung between them, not reckless, but inevitable. They discussed possibilities carefully. A riverboat scheduled within weeks. Supplies gathered gradually to avoid notice. Routes learned through whispered accounts passed from plantation to plantation. Nothing guaranteed safety, but remaining guaranteed danger. As they parted, Eleanor realized fear no longer dominated her thoughts. Instead, she felt clarity, the kind that comes only when a decision has already been made deep within the heart. Across Belmore Plantation, night settled heavily. Jonathan sat alone reviewing ledgers yet unable to focus. Instinct warned him that control was slipping in ways he could not fully understand. Order still existed outwardly, but beneath it he sensed resistance forming like cracks beneath polished stone. He resolved to uncover whatever threatened his authority. Unknowingly, his search would soon bring him closer to truth than anyone desired. Days passed with unbearable tension. Every sound felt amplified, hoofbeats, closing doors, distant voices carried by wind. Even ordinary routines seemed charged with hidden meaning. Samuel prepared quietly, Eleanor prepared silently, and the plantation itself waited, suspended between past and future. By the end of summer's first month, the fragile balance holding Belmore together would begin to collapse. Because once people choose hope over fear, history itself begins to move, and Act 4 would begin not with whispers, but with discovery. The storm arrived without warning. Not the kind carried by thunder or lightning, but the kind born from suspicion finally finding proof. For weeks, Jonathan Hale had felt it, a slow unraveling he could not name. Order still existed on Belmore Plantation. Routines followed their expected rhythm, yet something beneath the surface resisted him. Workers obeyed, but without submission. Conversations stopped too quickly. Even the house itself felt altered, as if walls were keeping secrets. Jonathan had built his life on control, and control, once threatened, demanded action. It began with something small, a ledger misplaced in the study. Jonathan noticed immediately because he never misplaced anything. The book reappeared later that evening exactly where it belonged, yet a faint smudge marked one corner. Dirt, not from the house, but from outside soil. Someone had touched his records, someone who should not have been there. The discovery unsettled him more than he admitted. That night he walked the halls long after servants retired, listening to the quiet creaks of the house. Every shadow seemed alive with possibility. Then came the second sign. A stable boy reported seeing movement near the river path after midnight. Two figures where none should have been. The boy could not identify them, only that one walked with the posture of someone educated, upright, and deliberate. Jonathan dismissed him publicly but memorized every word. By morning, suspicion hardened into certainty. Something was happening behind his back, and he intended to uncover it. Eleanor sensed danger before she understood why. Jonathan's behavior shifted subtly, yet unmistakably. He asked questions casually but too often. He appeared in rooms without announcement. Twice she caught him watching her with an expression she had never seen before. Not anger, but calculation. The safety she once felt inside the house vanished. She reduced lessons immediately, dismissing the small group she had secretly taught. Books disappeared into hidden compartments beneath loose floorboards. Every movement became deliberate, cautious. Still, anxiety followed her constantly. That evening during supper, Jonathan spoke little. The silence stretched unbearably until he finally said without looking at her, "Strange things are happening nearby. Escapes, disobedience. Someone is encouraging it." Eleanor forced calm into her voice. Rumors often grow larger than truth. Jonathan smiled faintly. "Yes," he said, "but rumors begin somewhere." His eyes met hers then, searching. Eleanor held his gaze, though her heartbeat thundered against her ribs. For the first time since their marriage, she felt certain he no longer trusted her. Samuel also noticed the tightening atmosphere. Patrol riders doubled. Lantern inspections extended later into the night. Workers were questioned individually under the pretense of routine checks. Even conversations in the fields felt dangerous now. Plans that once seemed possible began slipping toward impossibility. During a secret meeting near the cotton rows, voices trembled with urgency. "We must leave soon," one man insisted. "Waiting will kill us." Samuel understood their fear, but haste meant exposure. "Another few days," he said carefully. "We move when the riverboat arrives, not before." Yet even as he spoke, unease settled heavily within him. Jonathan was watching, and watchers eventually see too much. The discovery came 3 nights later. Jonathan could not sleep. Restlessness drove him outside just before midnight. He walked without lantern, guided by moonlight and instinct more than intention. As he passed the garden path, he heard voices. Low, urgent, familiar. He froze. Carefully, he stepped closer, remaining within shadow. Through the magnolia branches, he saw them, Eleanor and Samuel. Standing close, not touching but bound by something unmistakable. Their conversation carried fragments through the warm night air. "After tomorrow," Eleanor whispered. "We cannot delay." Samuel nodded. "The river crossing will be clear." Jonathan's breath stopped. The meaning struck him instantly. Violently. Escape. Betrayal. Not only rebellion among workers, but betrayal within his own household. His wife conspiring with an enslaved man. For several seconds he could not move. Rage battled disbelief inside him. Every certainty he possessed shattered at once. Then a branch snapped beneath his foot. Both figures turned. Eleanor's face drained of color as she saw him step forward from darkness. Silence fell heavy and absolute. Jonathan's voice emerged cold and controlled, more frightening than anger. "So," he said slowly, "this is where truth has been hiding." Samuel stepped slightly forward, instinctively placing himself between them. Jonathan noticed immediately. The gesture confirmed everything. Guards were summoned within minutes. Lanterns flared across the garden as chaos erupted. Workers emerged from quarters, drawn by shouting and movement. Samuel did not resist when seized, though his eyes never left Eleanor's. Jonathan ordered him bound and taken away. Eleanor stood, frozen as realization crashed over her. The secrecy, the hope, the fragile future they imagined had ended in a single moment. Jonathan turned toward her last. "I welcomed betrayal from many places," he said quietly. "But never from my own wife." She found her voice through trembling breath. "I did not betray you," she said. "I chose what was right." The words struck harder than accusation. Jonathan's expression hardened into something unrecognizable. "You have destroyed everything," he replied. Morning brought spectacle. News traveled rapidly beyond Belmore. Neighboring plantation owners arrived under the guise of concern, but remained for curiosity. Authority figures gathered to witness events unfolding. Samuel was confined under guard. Others suspected of involvement were questioned harshly. Fear spread across the plantation like wildfire. Eleanor was confined to her room, watched constantly. Servants avoided her gaze, unsure whether to fear or pity her. Inside, she felt neither regret nor shame, only grief that freedom had come so close. Jonathan faced mounting pressure from peers demanding swift punishment. To maintain authority, he needed visible action. Leniency would signal weakness. Weakness invited collapse. He convinced himself justice required severity. Yet beneath his anger lingered something deeper. Wounded pride, humiliation too profound to name. That afternoon he visited Eleanor. They stood opposite each other, strangers sharing familiar space. "You could have had everything," he said. "I never had anything that was truly mine," she answered softly. He studied her as though seeing her for the first time. Not obedient wife, not social partner, but an individual beyond his control. And that realization hurt more than betrayal itself. Outside, preparations began for public judgment. Word spread through nearby towns. Crowds would come, because in that world, punishment was not only correction, it was performance. And by nightfall, Belmore Plantation stood on the edge of irreversible transformation. The secret was no longer hidden, the choice had been exposed, and Act 5 would begin with consequences no one could escape. The morning of judgment arrived wrapped in unnatural stillness. Even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. Mist drifted low across Belmore Plantation, softening the sharp outlines of buildings and fields, as if the land itself wished to hide what was about to happen. Workers moved quietly under supervision, their movements careful, their eyes lowered but alert. Word had spread beyond the plantation boundaries during the night. Riders had carried news to neighboring estates, and curiosity, mixed with expectation, drew visitors before sunrise. Punishment, in that time and place, was never private. It was meant to be seen. Jonathan Hale stood on the gallery overlooking the yard, dressed with meticulous precision. His coat was dark despite the heat, his posture rigid. every detail calculated to project authority. Yet exhaustion lived behind his eyes. He had not slept. All night he replayed the garden scene, Eleanor's voice, Samuel's calm defiance, the unbearable realization that control had slipped beyond his reach long before he noticed. What haunted him most was not disobedience. It was certainty. They had believed they were right, and that belief threatened everything he understood about the world. Below, guards assembled near the old oak tree where announcements were traditionally made. A platform had been erected quickly, rough boards nailed together before dawn. A stage. Jonathan hated how appropriate that felt. Eleanor watched from an upstairs window, hands clasped tightly before her. She had been told she would remain inside, separated from the proceedings, but distance could not protect her from reality. Every sound traveled upward, voices gathering, horses shifting, murmurs swelling into anticipation. Fear existed, but it no longer ruled her. Something inside had changed the moment truth was revealed. Secrets had been heavy. Honesty, even dangerous honesty, felt strangely freeing. For the first time since arriving at Belmore, she no longer pretended. A servant entered quietly behind her. "They are bringing him out," the woman whispered, Eleanor. Closed her eyes briefly before turning back to the window. Samuel emerged between two guards. His hands were bound, but his posture remained upright, steady. He walked without hesitation, scanning the gathered crowd once before lifting his gaze toward the house. Toward her. Though separated by distance and glass, she felt the connection instantly. He was not afraid, and that gave her strength. The crowd fell silent when Jonathan stepped forward. He read from prepared notes, voice carrying across the yard. "Order must be maintained," he declared. "Without order there is chaos. Without obedience, there is destruction." The words sounded, rehearsed even to him. He spoke of betrayal, conspiracy, threats to stability. Each sentence reinforced the system that defined his identity. Faces in the crowd nodded. Planters, merchants, men invested in certainty. Yet as he spoke, he noticed something unsettling. The workers were watching differently. Not with submission. With attention, as though witnessing not power but its test. Jonathan's voice faltered briefly before recovering. "The consequences," he continued, "must serve as a lesson." He lowered the paper. Silence stretched. All eyes turned to Samuel. "Do you have anything to say?" Jonathan asked, intending the question as formality. Samuel hesitated only a moment. "Yes." The single word rippled through the crowd. Jonathan almost refused, almost ended it there, but pride compelled him forward. "Speak," he said. Samuel stepped closer to the edge of the platform. His voice was calm, clear enough to carry without shouting. "I did not seek violence," he said. "I sought freedom." Murmurs stirred. "I worked," he continued. "I obeyed. I waited. But a man cannot live forever as something he is not." He paused, scanning faces, workers, visitors, strangers. "I am not property. None of us are." The words landed heavily. Guards shifted uneasily. Jonathan felt anger rise, yet beneath it lay something far more dangerous: doubt. Because Samuel did not sound rebellious. He sounded reasonable, and reason was harder to silence than rage. Eleanor could not remain still any longer. Before fear could stop her, she left her room and descended the stairs. Servants gasped quietly, but did not interfere. By the time she reached the yard, Samuel had finished speaking. Jonathan saw her immediately. Shock flickered across his face. "You were ordered to remain inside," he said sharply. "I will not hide," she replied, stepping forward. The crowd leaned closer, sensing drama beyond expectation. Eleanor faced Jonathan fully. "You believe punishment will restore order," she said, "but truth does not disappear. Because you forbid it." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "You have embarrassed this household enough." "No," she said gently. "The system embarrasses itself. Gasps moved through the crowd. She turned slightly, addressing everyone present. You fear change because you believe power makes you safe, but fear rules this place more than any law. Her voice trembled but did not break, and fear cannot last forever. Jonathan felt control slipping completely now, not through violence, but through words he could not easily counter. For the first time, uncertainty spread among the observers. Some shifted uncomfortably, others avoided eye contact. The performance was no longer proceeding as expected. Jonathan looked at Samuel again, bound, calm, unbroken. He realized suddenly that punishment would not restore authority. It would only prove Samuel right. The understanding arrived slowly but irresistibly. Power enforced through fear required constant reinforcement. One act would lead to another, then another, forever. There would never be enough punishment to silence an idea once spoken aloud. He lowered his gaze. For several long seconds, no one moved. Then Jonathan spoke, quieter now, but unmistakably clear. Remove the restraints. The guards hesitated. Now. They obeyed. Shock rippled through the crowd. Samuel rubbed his wrists but remained still, waiting. Jonathan struggled for words. Every expectation pressed against him. Tradition, reputation, the watching eyes of his peers. Yet something inside him had shifted irreversibly. You will leave Belmore, he said finally. Today. You will not return. Whispers erupted. It was not mercy exactly, nor justice, but it was refusal to continue the performance. Samuel nodded slowly. That is enough, he said. Their eyes met, not as master and enslaved man, but as two individuals standing at the edge of change, neither fully understood. By afternoon, Samuel walked toward the river road carrying only a small bundle. Several workers watched silently. Some nodded almost imperceptibly as he passed. Eleanor stood beneath the oak tree, waiting. They did not embrace. The moment required something quieter. You're free now, she said. He smiled faintly. I think freedom begins before anyone allows it. She nodded, understanding. The riverboat whistle sounded in the distance. Samuel turned toward the road, then paused. You changed something here? He told her. No, she said softly. You did. He left then, disappearing into sunlight and dust. Months later, Belmore Plantation continued to operate, but something fundamental had altered. Workers spoke more carefully, yet more openly. Jonathan ruled less through fear, more through uneasy compromise. Rumors spread across neighboring estates about what had happened, each telling slightly different but carrying the same core truth. Authority had hesitated, and hesitation changed everything. Eleanor began teaching openly, first children, then adults, under the justification of religious instruction. Jonathan allowed it, though he never explained why. Perhaps he no longer fully believed in the old certainty, or perhaps he understood that history was already moving, with or without him. Years later, travelers along the Mississippi told stories of a man who helped others find passage north, educated, calm, speaking several languages, guiding people quietly toward new lives. Some said he had once been enslaved. Others said he had never been. The river kept its answer, but it remembered, and so did everyone whose lives had changed. The morning truth stood on a wooden platform and refused to be silent. The end.